Using the square root property, when there is no linear term in the equation, another method of solving a quadratic equation is by using the square root property, in which we isolate the x squared term and take the square root of the number on the other side of the equal sign. Keep in mind that sometimes we may have to manipulate the equation to isolate the x squared term so that the square root property can be used. Now the square root property states that with the x squared term isolated, the square root property states that if x squared equals k, then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of k, where k is a non-zero real number. Don't forget the plus or minus sign because that means it's two solutions. Given a quadratic equation with an x squared term but no x term, we're going to use the square root property to solve it. We're first going to isolate the x squared term on one side of the equal sign. We're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation, putting a plus or minus sign before the expression on the side opposite the squared term. And number 3, we're going to simplify the numbers on the side with the plus or minus sign. So for example 6, solving a simple quadratic equation using the square root property. Solve the quadratic using the square root property x squared is equal to 8. So the first step is we have x squared is equal to 8. So we have to ask ourselves, is the x squared term isolated on one side of the equation? It is. And so now the next step is to use the square root property. So we got to take the square root of both sides, and again, do not forget to write plus or minus. Number 3. So for number 3, what do we have to square to get x squared? Well, the answer is x. And over here, what do we have to square to get 8? Well, it's not a perfect square, so we need to factor out a perfect square, keeping the plus or minus sign. Well, the perfect square is the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. So now, what do we have to square to get 4 is 2. So x is going to equal plus or minus 2 times the square root of 2. And therefore, our solutions are negative 2 times the square root of 2, positive 2 times the square root of 2. And if we take a look at our graph, you can see where it crosses the x-axis at negative 2.828 and 2.828. So let's take a look and see what 2 times the square root of 2 looks like on our calculator. 2 times the square root of 2 is 2.828, which gives us that result.